A Peak of Freedom by Brittany Schultz. Leaving my comfortable life in Minneapolis for an adventure of a lifetime in Dunedin, New Zealand during the spring of 2011 is something that, as cliché as it sounds, changed my life. It was a trip that took my education out of the classroom and put it in real-life perspective. When I arrived in New Zealand, I quickly learned the value of a good friend. I began to miss family, friends, and most of all, the boyfriend I had left behind. As the first few weeks began, I was filled with mixed emotions. I was excited, yet nervous, and happy, yet sad. I realized I needed to do something to fill the odd void, but couldn't exactly put my finger on what was wrong. 2 months into our journey in New Zealand, the family I created for myself and I decided to climb the infamous Mount Cook, the highest point in New Zealand. We packed the family van we had named Marvy and headed off into the great wide open. The car ride was uncomfortable, as there were 7 of us with supplies, food, and camping gear crammed into one small space. The car rides in New Zealand were always filled with breathtaking views. Thousands of colors, blues, whites, purples, and greens, painted the oceans, mountains, and fields. Sheep dot the pastures as they graze carelessly through the grass. I stood up from my middle seat and as carelessly as the sheep in the meadows leaned my head out of the sunroof and let the wind take my air and my breath. It was a moment of freedom from my worries, from my troubles, and mostly from the cramped car. 4 hours later, we saw Mount Cook peeking through the dark. Its beauty was undeniable. We set up camp for the night, and because there were no lights around, we were quickly engaged by millions of stars glowing brightly above us. We laid our sleeping bags in a circle and began to wish on shooting stars. The stars seemed to shine a little brighter, beam a little bigger, and fall a little more in the southern hemisphere. The morning was a brutal wake-up call. Frost covered my sleeping bag, and I had slept on a rock. Small prices to pay for the spectacular view I saw when I woke up, the sun rising just peeking over the top of Mount Cook. We began the trail around 11 a.m. with positive faces and loud songs. The fun soon began to wear off as we realized this was about to be an extremely challenging and rough journey. The sun's rays beating down on us made the hike up the humid and sticky one. The first section of the hike consisted of little rock climbing, but stuck mostly to the nature-made stairs that were at a constant incline. About halfway up the mountain, there was a pond where we rested for lunch. We looked down at the tiny village of Oroki, the crystal blue waters, and the browns of the paths and roads. Above and all around us were snow-covered mountain tops. "We're doing it!" quickly became our motto as excitement and pain started to settle through our bodies. It was just the motivation we needed as we began rock climbing at an intense angle. Hoisting ourselves through the rocks and grass, we finally arrived at a valley of snow. In the awful heat, it was a lovely, cool surprise. About 30 more minutes of climbing, and we had finally reached the ridge. Snow. Snow all around us. It was fabulous. Our next and final step was the trudge through that snow and rocks to the tiny cabin called Mueller Hut. 28 wooden beds lined the walls in this 3-room cabin. After claiming our spot to sleep, we continued the hike to the very tip-top of Mount Olivier. We had made it just in time to see the sun disappear behind the mountain range. The colors the sunset produced mimicked those of a rainbow, bright and vivid, filling the sky from end to end as far as I could see. A feeling once again came over me: freedom. A slight breeze began, and in the distance you could hear avalanches falling from the surrounding mountains. It was heaven on earth. One of the things on my bucket list was to watch the sunrise from a mountaintop. I awoke at 6 a.m. the next day and hiked those rocks in the dark, hoping to get high enough before the sun rose. I made it to almost the top before deciding I had gone far enough and sat to watch and think. It wasn't long before the sky was painted with pinks, oranges, and blues. Each of the sunrises and sunsets in New Zealand seemed to get better as my time went on, but this one will forever be molded in my mind. As if a cherry on top of a sundae, the sun peeked up over the tips of the mountain range, perfect enough to take in the whole effect. Sitting there on top of the world, I finally realized what it meant to be free. I let my legs dangle over the side without a care in the world. The natural beauty of this country, it was something that forever would change me and give me an appreciation for what life was. Being fearless, being happy, and mostly being free. Trusting yourself, believing in yourself, and knowing you can do it. Lessons that could not be learned within the gray streets of Minneapolis, but instead had to be learned out at the open sea, rolling hills, and vivid mountaintops of New Zealand. Lessons that would sink in when I least expected it, like while watching a sunrise from a mountaintop.